Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Coffee and Current Events. Today's going to be a little different than typical episodes. On this episode, we're going to be doing more so of a podcast. We're going to be diving deep into exactly what is going on in the Ukraine war, what's going to happen in the future, as well as many other topics. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, sit back, and enjoy this. The war in Ukraine has officially passed its first year anniversary. The war has brought about a permanent change to the global order of the entire world. Alliances have been tested, relations have been practically dissolved, and war has now become a part of the European continent. There is not enough words to actually express how serious, revelatory this war and its outcome will be for the future of the world and especially the future of Europe. We're going to address three main topics first, and then we're going to dive into some other topics I got for you guys. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this. So, let's start off with the basics. What happened in the Ukraine war, and what is the current state of the war? I'm explaining why the war was caused very briefly. For those of you who don't know, the war in Ukraine really did not start in 2022. It started back in 2014 after Putin annexed Crimea and began a limited intervention in the Donbass. On the Russian side of things, Putin claims Russia did this because NATO was pressing on his border, and he claims his goal is to denazify Ukraine. I think it would be wise for everyone to stay away from the official reasons for actions, whether on the Russian side or the West's side. On the West's side of the thing, they say Putin invaded Ukraine to restart the Soviet Empire. I think the most logical and historically proven reason for the invasion of Ukraine is simply the fact that big countries, big powers invade and conquer little powers and little countries for their own benefit. Selfish, crude, yes, but it's been happening ever since the beginning of humanity. So I don't think there's any deep philosophical reason for why he invaded Ukraine. I think it's very simple. I think he's simply expanding his country's interests. I've seen a lot of people out there who make these deep reasons behind it. I don't think there's too many deep reasons behind it. And this is coming from a person who studied this war out. I've watched documentaries about these people. I know what I'm talking about in this aspect. I don't think there's too much deep reasons by it. I think you can simply look at history. The best predictor of the future is the past. And just looking at the history of big countries, they expand themselves. That's just what happens. And sadly, little countries become the victim of the big country's expansion. It's not right at all, but that's what happened. I think that's the most logically simple reason for the expansion. There was no moral reason for him invading Ukraine, and there was no moral reason for the West seeking Ukraine to join NATO. It's simply expansion of powers. Powers do that. That's what we've seen throughout history, as I said again and again. The British Empire, the Roman Empire, Napoleonic French Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the Brazilian Empire. Even if you look at the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, this is all throughout history. Countries expand. In fact, I'd say expansion probably was the cause of 80% of all wars we've had throughout history. So that's why I think the invasion of Ukraine happened. Now, the current state of the war is something a little more complicated. Throughout this entire war, we've seen battles rage. Horrible battles, Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and now Bakhmut. We've seen the tide turn. We saw the Russians invade Ukraine, almost take Kiev, it seemed, and then the Russians withdrew from Kiev. It looked like the tide turned. It looked to some as if the war may be over soon. Then after that, we saw the Russians expand their front in Donbass. During the beginning phase of the Battle of Donbass, the Russians took town after town, and it seemed like they had a wave of unstoppable momentum on their side. And then, Ukraine's Kharkiv counteroffensive. The tide seems to turn. It looks like Russia's entire front may collapse. And then Ukraine's counteroffensive slows down. And now the Battle of Bakhmut, which is a meat grinder for both sides. And now the current state is leading many people to say the war is currently at a stalemate. Bakhmut is definitely a meat grinder. Both sides can agree. Russia and Ukraine both know Bakhmut is a meat grinder. No one knows exact casualties of this meat grinder, but the casualties are horrific. It is considered by many the bloodiest battle in the 21st century. This battle is very reminiscent of the First World War. I'm talking about very reminiscent of the Battle of Verdun. This battle has lasted longer than Stalingrad, with the initial phase of the battle beginning on August 1st, 2022. There has been probably the most intense shelling in the entire 21st century on this one city called Bakhmut. Both sides are fighting for it, and the reason for their fight is almost a mystery to many people. Some people say Bakhmut has no strategic importance, while others say it's the key to Donbass. On the surface, it seems as if the Russians really want to capture Bakhmut for a morale boost, a victory for the morale. However, with closer scrutiny, that reason doesn't hold water. It's highly unlikely that Russia is going to take thousands upon thousands of casualties simply for a morale boost. There has to be something more to that one city. On the other hand, with the Ukrainians, it's highly unlikely Ukraine would send thousands upon thousands upon thousands of troops into a city that is of no strategic value, as previously claimed by some dubious journalists. The Battle of Bakhmut is the main center of action in the entire war right now. And in my opinion, the Ukrainians are making a massive mistake by defending the city. The city of Bakhmut has become like Stalingrad for Zelensky back in World War II. Hitler wanted Stalingrad. Stalingrad, he wanted it so bad. This was the thing he craved. Stalingrad, Stalingrad, Stalingrad. And he vexed his generals with this odd desire for Stalingrad. His generals wanted to push on Moscow, but he wanted Stalingrad so bad. Why? No one knows. But it became a pursuit of his, a personal pursuit. And for whatever reason he wanted it, he wanted the city and sent his soldiers into the meat grinder that ended up in their massive defeat. And I think that's what's happened with Zelensky and Bakhmut. Bakhmut does have limited strategic value, but the way Zelensky is sending thousands of Ukrainian soldiers in this proverbial meat grinder is not worth the limited strategic value Bakhmut has. This city is not the key to the entirety of Ukraine. If this city falls, it does not mean Ukraine will fall. If this city falls, it doesn't even mean the Donetsk Oblast will fall. But he's sending thousands of troops into it. Ukraine has to prepare their forces for a future offensive against the Russians, but how can they do that when hundreds upon hundreds of soldiers are dying in Bakhmut? In fact, it was said not too long ago that Ukraine was losing 3-digit casualties every single day, and many believe the location of those casualties was in Bakhmut. Dead or wounded, it doesn't matter. 3-digit casualties every day for a city that is of limited strategic importance. But the problem of what the Ukrainian government has done is they've made Bakhmut a fortress of Ukrainian morale. They've talked about it so much. They've presented to their people and the world as a fortress of Ukraine. This is the same thing Zelensky did with Severodonetsk, which fell to the Russians after a little over a month of hard, brutal, bloody combat. And when you attach a country's morale and when you attach a people's hope to a city that you are not guaranteed to hold, that you may lose, you're forced to defend it, or else the people's morale could crumble. The problem is, for the sake of morale or for the sake of your image, you're sending hundreds and thousands of soldiers into a city where they become cannon fodder not too long after. In fact, it was literally estimated the average lifetime. In fact, it's been estimated that average lifetime of a Ukrainian soldier in Bakhmut is 4 hours. 4 hours. And one more soldier could be dead. No one knows exactly how many casualties have been suffered in Bakhmut. I think it's safe to estimate both sides have lost well over 10,000 casualties. When you hear reports like this, Ukrainian soldiers claiming that they were in a multi-day firefight with 50 Russian troops dug into a tree line in some places, and I quote, "We were only 100 meters apart," unquote. And even when the former advisor to the president of Ukraine, Oleksiy Arestovich, said Ukraine was suffering serious losses along the Soledar Bakhmut front, you know there are extremely heavy casualties there. But the problem with this battle is it's not going to end. Russia's not going to stop attacking this town until they prevail. Wagner is going to keep tightening the noose around Bakhmut until they capture the city. And I'm telling you guys, it's only a matter of time, unless Ukraine launches a counteroffensive. Previously, I had made a video, and in the video, a Russian war correspondent told a Russian state TV anchor that they were advancing 3 centimeters a day. That was well over a month ago, but their advance has sped up, and Bakhmut is being slowly but surely encircled by Russian forces. And Ukraine is either going to have to launch a counteroffensive, withdraw from the city, or stay there and be trapped. If they withdraw from the city, it could make a serious dent in the Ukrainian people's morale, and it will be an almost total waste of hundreds of soldiers. If they stay in the city, they're risking thousands of troops being trapped, and Bakhmut could be turned into another Mariupol. In other words, a disaster. These 3 options all come at a cost, but Ukrainians have to take one of them in the very near future, or Bakhmut will end up falling. In the meantime, Russia launched a disastrous assault on the city of Volodar. And although this assault was absolutely disastrous and Russia has lost significant casualties, it's not a significant game changer in the war. If Russia loses, Ukraine wins, but there's no change in the tide of the war. If Russia wins, Ukraine loses, but there's no real change in the tide of the war. Volodar is not a hypercritical city. Russia's also launched an offensive around the Savatov-Kreminna line, which has been going very slowly and many times highly unsuccessfully. So the war is currently at a slow, grinding, attritional state of operations. But here's the thing, neither Russia or Ukraine can afford to continue this slow, grinding, attritional, high casualty costing way of warfare. There will have to be a breakthrough somehow. Someone's going to have to launch an offensive. Before we jump into that, let's discuss the casualties Russia and Ukraine have both suffered. Now, when it comes to casualties of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there is so much misinformation, so much biased information, and so much just flat out lies. So I'm going to address multiple sources and multiple different points of view on this matter. I'm going to address government estimates, and then I'm going to address independent estimates. And then from there, we're going to come up to a rough estimation of both Ukraine and Russia's losses. The United States estimated on February 16th that Russian forces had lost 200,000 personnel killed and wounded. Now, these include Rosgvardia, FSB, FSO, Wagner, DPR, LPR, and other Russian auxiliary forces present in combat. On February 17th, the United Kingdom estimated that 175,000 to 200,000 personnel have been killed or wounded in the Russian forces, with 40 to 60,000 being killed. Now, on January 22nd, the Norwegian Chief of Defense estimated that 180,000 personnel of the Russian forces had been killed or wounded. If you look at these Western estimates, they're roughly the same, but that in no way indicates truth. According to BBC News Russian and Media Zona's estimate, on February 17th, 2023, Russia had taken 43,000 soldiers killed and 150,000 injured. That would total around 193,000 casualties. This estimate is close, very similar to the UK and US estimate, which ranges from 175 to 200,000 casualties. BBC News and Media Zona say about 193,000 casualties. These losses may seem unbelievably high, but check this out. An independent Russian source named iStories claimed Russia had suffered 90,000 casualties, and that was back in late 2022. However, there have been other sources that have suggested Russia has suffered around 150,000 casualties. So I think it's safe to put Russian casualty estimates between 150 to 200,000 losses. Granted, this is a high estimate, but I would still put it around 150 to 200,000 losses. However, be alert to the fact that both the United States and the United Kingdom have an agenda, and as we see, they're both supplying Ukraine, so therefore they may be a little biased towards it. But also be aware of when two governments' information line up almost identically. However, I still think it's safe to put Russian casualties between 150 to 200,000 KIA, or wounded in action, captured, missing, deserted, whatever. Now for Ukrainian losses. On January 22nd, 2023, the Norwegian Chief of Defense estimated that 100,000 Ukrainian personnel had been killed or wounded during the war. This coincided with other Western estimates. But on February 7th, the Telegraph estimated that Ukraine had lost 120,000 soldiers killed and wounded. These losses are pretty similar, anywhere from 100 to 120,000 KIA or wounded in action. And the losses seem to line up until you hear this. In late November, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said this, and I quote, "More than 100,000 Ukrainian military officers have been killed so far." She didn't say wounded or missing. Now, the EU was quick to correct their supposed mistakes, claiming that, no, she meant killed and wounded. She didn't mean just killed, she meant killed and wounded. But I would disagree with that for one important reason. If you hear what I just said, more than 100,000 Ukrainian military officers have been killed so far, it sounds like that could have been a slip of, it's a slip of the tongue. Not if you hear a little more of the statement. If you just go a little back, she said this: "It is estimated that 20,000 civilians and more than 100,000 Ukrainian military officers have been killed so far." Is she saying that 20,000 civilians have been killed and wounded, as well as 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers? It is highly unlikely that she was saying 20,000 civilians have been killed and injured. I have yet to hear one government official mention civilian casualties unless it's exclusively about civilian deaths. So the fact that she said it is estimated that 20,000 civilians and more than 100,000 Ukrainian military officers have been killed so far, that probably wasn't an accident. Could she have slipped up and meant killed and wounded? Yeah, she could have. But also the real numbers could have just leaked out, especially considering other independent estimates estimate Ukraine has lost well over 100,000 soldiers killed. What do I mean by independent estimate? Colonel Douglas McGregor, a former U.S. Colonel Douglas McGregor, has estimated that Ukraine has lost well over 150,000 soldiers KIA. That's not injured, that's just KIA. Am I saying Colonel McGregor is right? No. Am I saying he's unbiased? Definitely not. But his analysis is worth considering when you see Ursula von der Leyen's accidental slip-up. Another factor to consider is that Russia is hammering Ukraine with up to 60,000 artillery shells and rockets per day. 60,000 per day. Many Western analysts and many Western sources have pointed out that most of the Russian ammunition does not hit its target. That is definitely true, but still, the fact that they're firing 60,000 rounds of artillery or rockets per day may just be a slight indication that there are high Ukrainian losses that are underreported or just not reported at all for the sake of the current narrative. On the other hand, Ukraine is firing about 6,000 to 7,000 artillery shells a day. Okay, so if Ukraine has inflicted 150 to 200,000 casualties on the Russians, and if they're firing 6,000 to 7,000 artillery shells a day, it's highly possible that Ukraine has lost double the losses Russia has, with Russia firing 60,000 rounds or rockets a day. And despite the fact that most of the shells Russia uses are dumb shells, meaning they're not precision guided, 60,000 rounds of artillery a day is still enough to do extremely heavy damage to a military. That's what's making Bakhmut so deadly. It's the artillery more than it is the intense combat. It's the artillery. So I would estimate Russian casualties about 150 to 200,000, with Ukrainian losses being anywhere from 120,000 to well over 300,000. That may sound dubious, it's not the current narrative, but given the stuff I just listed, I think it's worth considering. Now, don't get bent out of shape, it does not mean Ukraine's going to lose the war. The Soviet Union lost way more men than the Nazis did. The Soviet Union lost like 4 times the amount of casualties the Nazis did in Operation Barbarossa, and yet they still prevailed. Just because someone loses more men doesn't mean they're going to lose the war. I'm just simply reporting what the evidence is suggesting. Now, where is this war headed? Well, I think the combat is going to seriously heat up in the summer and in the spring, starting in the spring. And we may even see the outcome of the war decided in the spring and summer. With all the Western equipment, Western tanks, Western AFVs, Western ammo, Western artillery, with all these Western equipment arriving in Ukraine, Ukraine can use this stuff to launch a massive offensive that could break the Russian positions, either in the south, near Zaporozhye and Kherson, or in the north, near Luhansk. Russia, on the other hand, is starting to get the 300,000 mobilized recruits from Putin's partial mobilization. That, with the Wagnerites, plus the original Russian soldiers already there, are enough men to launch a brutal offensive that will be bloody and horrible. So the war's going to be way more intense in the second year than it was the first. It's going to be way harsher the second year than it was the first. It's going to be way bloodier in the second year than it was the first. And it's possible that the outcome of the war is decided this spring and summer. With the massive geopolitical ramifications this has, you can't miss out on this. Subscribe to this channel, that way you're not missing out on this breaking news. You don't want to miss out on this, you don't want to be caught in the dark, because whatever happens in Europe, as history has taught us, affects the world, i.e. World War I and World War II. So, stay subscribed, stay tuned, hit the notification bell, share the news with a friend. God bless, and I'll catch you on the next episode.